Today, Ilorin is a busy Nigerian city at the crossroads of cultures. Its people speak Yoruba, Hausa, Fulfulde, and English. Its skyline is shaped by mosques and palaces, markets and modern buildings. But hidden beneath this everyday life is a dramatic story of war, betrayal, religion, and ambition. Once, Ilorin was a frontier garrison of the powerful Yoruba Oyo Empire. Then, in the early 1800s, it became the center of a Fulani-led emirate tied to the Sokoto Caliphate. How did a Yoruba war camp transform into a Fulani-ruled city? How did the ambitions of one general, Afonja, and the influence of one scholar, Mallam Alimi, change West African history? This is the story of the Fulani Jihad in Ilorin, the fall of Afonja, and the birth of the Ilorin Emirate. To understand Ilorin's transformation, we must start with the Oyo Empire. For centuries, Oyo was one of the greatest powers in West Africa. Its cavalry dominated the savannah. Its kings, called Alaafin, received tribute from many towns and kingdoms. Merchants carried goods and enslaved people across its vast territory, linking the Atlantic coast to the interior. At its height, Oyo controlled a web of provinces and border towns. Ilorin was one of those frontier towns, protecting Oyo's northern border from raids in rival states. But by the late 1700s and early 1800s, the Oyo Empire was in deep trouble. Inside the palace, powerful chiefs and generals struggled with the Alaafin for control. Rival princes, court intrigues, and repeated civil wars weakened the center. Outside, new pressures were rising. The Atlantic slave trade disrupted older patterns of trade and politics. Northern neighbors, including Nupe and various Hausa and Fulani groups, tested Oyo's strength. The empire that had once intimidated others was now showing cracks. In this moment of crisis, Ilorin, on the edge of Oyo, would become the stage for a dangerous experiment in power. Long before it became an emirate, Ilorin was a military town. Situated on the northern frontier of Oyo, it was a defensive outpost against raids from the north and northeast. The town stood between the Oyo heartland and the lands of Nupe, Hausa, and Fulani communities further up the savannah. Ilorin was also the base of one of the most feared offices in Oyo, the Are Ona Kakanfo, the commander-in-chief of Oyo's armies. The Are was chosen by the Alaafin, but his duty was dangerous. He lived on the frontier, far from the royal capital, closer to enemies than to the king. He was expected to fight constantly and never turn his back in battle. Defeat could mean disgrace or death. Over time, Ilorin became more than just a camp. It was a meeting ground of peoples. Yoruba farmers and warriors, Nupe traders, Hausa and Fulani merchants and scholars passed through its markets. Islamic learning was already present, carried by northern scholars and clerics who settled in the area. In this mix of cultures, one man would rise to shape Ilorin's destiny, Afonja, the Are Ona Kakanfo. Afonja was not an ordinary soldier. As Are Ona Kakanfo, he commanded Oyo's armies, and his base in Ilorin gave him control over a key strategic region. According to oral traditions and later histories, tensions grew between Afonja and the Alaafin of Oyo. The king expected loyalty and obedience. The Aare expected respect and independence. Some accounts say the Alaafin ordered Afonja to attack a powerful town that was almost impossible to conquer, perhaps hoping to get rid of him. Others emphasize Afonja's growing ambition, his desire to rule Ilorin as his own domain, rather than as a mere servant of Oyo. Whatever the exact details, the result was clear. Afonja rebelled against the Alaafin. He began to act as if Ilorin were no longer just a frontier outpost, but a rival power. To strengthen his position, Afonja needed men and weapons. He called on discontented warriors and slaves who had fled their masters. He also opened his doors to Muslim scholars and fighters from the north, who were already part of a wider reform movement. Among them was a Fulani cleric whose influence would transform Ilorin, Mallam Alimi. To understand Mallam Alimi's role in Ilorin, we must look north, to the Sokoto Jihad. In 1804, Usman Dan Fodio, a Fulani scholar and preacher, launched a major Islamic reform movement in Hausaland. He criticized corrupt rulers and called for a purer practice of Islam. His followers, many of them Fulani, but also Hausa and others, fought and overthrew several Hausa kingdoms, creating what became known as the Sokoto Caliphate. This movement, often called a jihad, was both religious and political. It combined calls for justice and reform with military conquest and state building. As Sokoto expanded, waves of scholars, preachers, and warriors moved across the region. Some of them reached the borders of Oyo. Among these figures was Mallam Alimi, also known in some traditions as Shehu Alimi. Alimi was a Muslim scholar and leader who settled near Ilorin. His community grew, attracting Hausa, Fulani, and other followers. For Afonja, facing conflict with Oyo and needing fighters, Alimi's presence was an opportunity. Afonja allowed, and perhaps invited, Alimi and his followers to support him. In return, Alimi gained influence in a strategic town on the edge of the Oyo Empire. At first, it looked like a perfect alliance: military ambition on one side, religious leadership and disciplined fighters on the other. But alliances in times of crisis are rarely simple. With Alimi's support, Ilorin changed rapidly. Afonja's forces were strengthened by Muslim warriors and by a growing group known as the Jama, a community of diverse fighters, many of them runaway slaves, adventurers, and people displaced by wars. They were attracted by promises of freedom, plunder, and a new order. Ilorin became a magnet for those who were unhappy with the old system of Oyo. Under this new coalition, Afonja was able to defy the Alaafin more boldly. Ilorin stopped behaving like a loyal border garrison and started acting like an independent war camp. Islamic learning spread more visibly in the town. Mosques and Quranic schools became more important. Alimi's influence deepened as people looked to him for religious guidance and moral authority. But at the same time, power was shifting in a more subtle way. The Jama, the armed community that Afonja had helped gather, did not owe their loyalty only to him. Many of them saw Alimi and his family as their true leaders. They fought under Islamic banners as well as under Afonja's command. In this crowded field of ambitions and beliefs, who truly owned Ilorin? Was it Afonja, the Yoruba warlord? Or was it Alimi, the Fulani scholar whose followers were growing stronger every day? Tension was building. even as the alliance seemed successful. As time passed, the unity in Ilorin began to crack. Afonja had invited powerful allies into his domain, but he now found that those allies had their own vision for Ilorin's future. Alimi and his followers wanted Ilorin to be a properly Islamic town, aligned more closely with the ideals of the Sokoto Jihad. That meant a different kind of leadership and law than the traditional Oyo system. Afonja, on the other hand, was shaped by the warrior culture of Oyo. He valued his personal authority, his right to command, and his independence from any higher power, whether from Oyo's Alaafin or Sokoto's Caliph. Within Ilorin, different groups began to choose sides. Some remained loyal to Afonja as the original lord of the town. Others believed that Alimi, and later his sons, offered a more righteous and stable order. Sources differ on the exact sequence of events, but most agree that Alimi's followers, especially after his death, became increasingly confident and organized. The Jama'ah, once Afonja's instrument of rebellion, started to act more and more as an independent force, guided by Muslim leaders rather than by the emirate alone. Afonja's position grew weaker. He found himself surrounded not only by enemies outside Ilorin, but by rivals within his own stronghold. The alliance that had once protected him was turning into a trap. At last, the growing tensions exploded into open conflict. By this time, Alimi had died, but his legacy remained. His son, Abdul al-Salam, often remembered as Abdul Salami, emerged as a key figure among the Muslim community in Ilorin. The Jama'ah, increasingly loyal to the Alimi family and their cause, turned against Afonja. In a dramatic and violent struggle, Afonja's compound was attacked. The very warriors he had helped gather and whose strength he had relied on now besieged him. Accounts describe fierce fighting and flames consuming Afonja's residence. When it was over, the once mighty emirate Onakakanfo is dead. With his death, the last serious claim of Oyo-oriented leadership in Ilorin collapsed. The town was effectively in the hands of the Muslim warriors and scholars who had first come as allies. Symbolically, this was more than just the fall of one man. It was the end of Ilorin as a loyal outpost of the Oyo Empire. Ilorin had broken away and would never return to the old order. In the vacuum that followed, a new structure of power began to take shape. With Afonja gone, Ilorin followed a new path. Under Abd al-Salam, the son of Alimi, Ilorin's leadership was reorganized along the lines of the wider Sokoto Caliphate. The town became an emirate, ruled by an emir who was politically and spiritually linked to Sokoto. Ilorin now stood as a frontier emirate of the Caliphate, facing south towards the remaining Yoruba states. From its new position, Ilorin played a major role in the wars that followed the decline of Oyo. It took part in campaigns against the old Oyo heartland and later clashed with rising Yoruba powers such as Ibadan. Ilorin's rulers enforced Islamic law more systematically while still governing a population that was largely Yoruba in language and culture. The leadership was now firmly in the hands of the Alimi dynasty and their allies, Fulani in origin, but ruling a mixed community. This was the birth of what we now know as the Ilorin Emirate, a state that was Muslim and linked to Sokoto, but also deeply connected to Yoruba history and society. The story of Ilorin did not end with the creation of the Emirates. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Ilorin navigated a complex world of warfare, colonialism, and modern Nigerian politics. Yet, the legacy of Afonja's rebellion and Alimi's rise is still visible today. Ilorin remains a place where identities overlap. Many of its people identify as Yoruba in language and culture. At the same time, the city is marked by its Fulani emirate structure and its long tradition of Islamic scholarship. Palaces and mosques stand alongside markets where Yoruba, Hausa, and Fulani names mix. Traditional titles and Islamic offices exist side by side. This blending can be a source of pride and also of debate. Different groups remember the past in different ways, some emphasizing Afonja's resistance, others celebrating the Islamic heritage of the emirate. But all these memories point back to the same turning point, the period when Ilorin shifted from Oyo garrison to Fulani-led emirate. Understanding that turning point helps us see Ilorin not as belonging to just one group or the other, but as a city shaped by many hands and histories. The story of the Fulani Jihad in Ilorin is not a simple one of invaders and victims. It is a story of an empire in crisis, of a frontier general who reached too far, of religious reformers who became political rulers, and of a city that still carries the marks of that transformation today. From Afonja's rebellion to Alimi's arrival, from the fall of Oyo's authority to the rise of the Ilorin Emirate, we see how power, faith, and ambition can reshape entire regions. As we look at Ilorin now, a city of mixed languages, faith, and heritage, we are reminded that history is rarely black and white. It is made of alliances and betrayals, dreams and fears, victories and losses on all sides. If you would like to see more documentaries like this about the Oyo Empire, the Sokoto Caliphate, or the wars that followed in Yorubaland, please like this video, leave a comment with the next topic you want us to cover, and subscribe to the channel for more African history.